First and foremost, Happy New Year, y'all. Happy New Year. 2018 went by really fast, and nationally it was kind of a poop show. So hopefully 2019 is better. Let's at least hope for that and do our best to make it so. That was a Star Trek joke. Anyway, all right. So next week I'm going to be bringing items to the church that are brewery merchandise, and we're using these items to raise funds for the cost of the brewery. We actually got to talk to a local brewer yesterday, Rosker and I, and the two things that they said to keep in mind is it takes twice as long and 3 times as much money to do it than you think it's going to, and that's true. So there's quite a bit of cost going into this, so please support some of the merch and know that money is going to a good cause. It's going to be going to open this brewery where the profits are going to local charities, which is a good thing. I want to mention, before we get started, very important, the Women's March is the Saturday before the Martin Luther King Day Parade. So I think we need to be present at both, but try to be at both and not just one or the other. Let's be allies for women and for people of color. Amen?
Amen.
All right, so let's kick things off. We're going to be reading Mark chapter 8, starting in verse 22. It says this: They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man's hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." And then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. All right. Who wants to share first? Interested. Oh, what you got, Miss Judy?
All right, so we talked about two things. So we said, one, he pulls him aside rather than healing him. It says he took him out of the village.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it seems that often Jesus isn't about like doing miracles in front of people and saying, "Look at me."
Mm-hmm.
So like that it's about that person having faith in his ability and him offering that healing. But and then we were talking a little bit about the concept of often when someone had some kind of disability or something, there was often that belief that it was tied to they must have sinned or their parents or whatever. And at this particular verse, there's no kind of suggestion or conversation about like why, how long have you been blind? What caused this? What might that mean? And so that was, just I mean, you have to see the verses before and after. But just that, so often there was in that culture a sense of you did something to deserve this state of being.
That's true.
And also that it was like it was a two-part deal. There was the initial attempt, and then he saw like fuzzy, and then additional laying on of hands. So like
Good stuff.
It was a twofer.
Yeah, it was a twofer. It was a do-over. Let's see what else we got. A couple more. Yes, Bernie, what you got? Denise volunteered you.
I was going to say, I didn't have my hand. There's a prominent New Testament scholar active today for the last 40 years or so named Dominic Cross. And he says that moderns often make the mistake of thinking that we moderns are so sophisticated we can take these stories metaphorically, while that the ancients were so literal-minded that they thought that these were actual events in history. When in fact it's the other way around. It's at least certain wings of American Christianity that inaccurately takes these stories as literal events. That while it was the ancients that even at the time this would have been written could have seen it as a metaphor for enlightenment. That here is an individual that doesn't see everything clearly, but who after his encounter with Jesus does. So it can be equated to the various epiphanies across religious traditions of enlightenment breaking through within an individual.
Sure, and that's not unusual from how Jesus or any rabbi at that time taught. I mean, parables were there for a reason. They were metaphors. They weren't necessarily always literal, but there's truth in there. Just because it's not literal doesn't mean there's not some truth to it. Might not have actually happened, but there might have been some good points.
And one last point.
Yeah.
Particularly like the miracle stories. You know, I made it clear that I tend to reject miracle stories. But this one is one that could happen. You know, if we imagine that the individual in question was psychosomatically blind instead of organically, like from birth or something, that, you know, he could have had an ailment that was primarily psychological, and his faith in this itinerant healer could have brought him back to sight. I mean, that is within the realm of scientific possibility.
Sure.
Which I think is worth noting for this story.
Sure, that's true. I'm pretty sure my doctor does that sometimes. I can tend to be a hypochondriac. And I'm like, there's a lump. And they're like, there's no lump. And I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of feel it now, but is it gone now? Yeah, okay, go on. Yeah, it's probably like that. All right, good stuff. I'll take one more. Yes?
We were talking about how right after this, he tells the guy not to go back to the beach in like the next few verses. And it's kind of that whole idea of, well, if you're coming out of darkness and you're saved, and you're healed and you can see everything clearly, why go back to darkness? Why go back to where things were dark and painful before, but you now are saved, you can go forward and not do those stupid things.
That's a good point too. So there are several things about this passage that stand out to me. The first thing is, that's nasty. That is gross. I don't care if I'm blind. I am OCD as the day is long. I don't want anybody spitting on my face to heal me from my blindness, including Jesus. That is nasty. But looking back, there have been some metaphors that are buried in the Gospel of Mark, and some of the symbolism may be, and I'm not sure, I'm throwing out some hypotheticals there from some stuff that I've read. Some of these symbols may be presenting themselves again here in this passage. This healing is unusual, and Jody pointed this out, because compared to the other miracles, this healing did not happen instantaneously, which is very interesting. With the woman with the issue of blood, she reaches out, she touches Jesus' robe. You all remember talking about that story a couple months ago? She touches Jesus' robe, instantly healed, right? Jesus feeds the multitudes. Jesus blesses the food, and it just magically feeds everybody there in the story. But in this instance, Jesus heals this person in stages. Now, based on the symbolism that we've already discussed in Mark, I think it's fair to assume, and I could be wrong, that this passage is a metaphor for the history of humanity's understanding of the divine character of God. You see, Jesus heals this individual partially, and then they can only see in part. Everything was blurry according to this passage, and everyone appeared to look like what? Trees. Do you remember a few weeks ago when we discussed Jesus cursing something on the way to Jerusalem? What did Jesus curse on the way into Jerusalem? The fig tree, right? And what did the fig tree represent? Anybody remember? The system of the religious institution of Judaism at that time. It was basically their flag. So Jesus essentially burns a flag on the way into Jerusalem, and that story is a metaphor for a protest. So Jesus cursed the fig tree not because Jesus was anti-Semitic. That's stupid. Jesus was Jewish. However, Jesus was very critical about religious institution and the corruption that had found its way into the temple at this time. Now, fast forward to this week, and in the first stage of this healing process, this individual sees people as trees. Is there a coincidence there? Maybe, maybe not. I think it's highly possible that Jesus is using the tree that symbolizes a specific group of people that was believed to be God's chosen people at that time. And by using this symbolism, Jesus was saying that the knowledge of the divine's character and God's will for humanity was revealed partially in the Old Testament through tribal Judaism, but it was only partially revealed. I think Jesus might have been saying that the vision for the movement that God intended wasn't just for a specific group of people. In the Old Testament, we see the ancient tribal Jewish folks believed that they and they alone, no one else, were God's elect, God's chosen people. And Jesus not only often critiques the temple, Jesus critiques the Old Testament and gospel teachings often, and almost compares them to writings that are insufficient. So Jesus eventually even makes room for Gentiles in the movement, which just happened like a chapter ago, right? Jesus made room for the Gentiles to come into the movement of Christ. The pagans, they were welcome. So this movement that Jesus was starting labeled all of humanity as God's children, not just some. How often do you hear churches preach otherwise in this country? So in this miracle, Jesus reaches out, right, and touches this blind individual. And this person's sight was completely restored a second time. They could see beyond the forest and the trees that they could only see before, and they could see people as children, not just beings that happened to be on the right team, but everyone was welcome. How often do we as people reserve compassion based on what political identity or religion people associate themselves with? How often do we reserve compassion for those that think like we do? God's love and adoration expands to all people, and I believe that it would be God's will and desire for us to not only see others as equally beloved by God, but to draft and approve policy in which that belief is manifested, palpable, and reciprocated. There is not one person that you can see with your eyes that isn't a beloved child of God. Not one. So, am I 100% sure that I'm right on this? No, I'm not. I'm just sermonizing, hypothesizing, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. Now it's time to go beyond observation, though, and talk about application. Who's feeling brave? Who wants to share their application, their takeaway from today? Who we got first?
Okay, I'll go.
Awesome. Oscar.
I don't know anything about the Bible. What does this guy say? I think what this passage suggests is that this kind of tribal way of thinking is very arbitrary. It's very socially constructed. If this man's perspective on the community that surrounds him can change so quickly, so can all of ours. And that just shows how insignificant that way of thinking us them.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff. And as a side note, I didn't put this in my sermon. Y'all, one thing that I'm seeing already is like now that we're in primary season and everybody's pissed off at Trump, whether you're like a liberal or a leftist and everything in between, is we're all like kind of turning against each other. We're gonna lose that way. We can't do that anymore. We've got to wrestle with candidates. We got to be honest about it. But at the end of the day, we can't have this divided populace. Re-elections are very easy, and I want this tyrant gone. Only 5 presidents have ever lost re-election in history of America. Usually, I try not to talk about that behind the pulpit, but this dude's problematic. So, what else we got?
We talked about that idea of, the sense of the us them, and that this is a call to, dismiss that attitude, and also, I talked about I really try and avoid bringing the emotion of like hatred up in my life, because I think it hurts me. A person who I'm hating doesn't care that I hate them. But I think that, these political times are challenging me in that space. And so looking at a place like, I don't, this is, they're all children of God, even if I disagree with everything that comes out of their mouth. And so can I say like, I hate what they're saying, I hate what they stand for, but I'm not going to embody the hate towards a child or creation of God. And so if I if I can separate that and then say, okay, but this person is still worth having that place and trying to restore their sight.
Yeah.
And so how do I process my own kind of reaction at a visceral level?
Yeah, and it's hard because I think anger is justified. And the one scripture that always pops up in my mind, especially like every day since 2016, is in your anger, do not sin. That space for anger is there, but still figuring out how to love your enemies.
Yeah.
You know, it's a tough thing to wrestle with.
And so that's kind of that space, like you really are being challenged to step up and literally love our enemy. And even not just our enemy, but like you said, there's a place where there's a group of us who have a shared enemy, and yet we are not a cohesive, supportive, easily, accepting group, even within the realm of our own bandwidth.
I read an article online. I'm not sure if it's like 100% accurate, but the concept was interesting. It said that spiders could actually consume the entire populace of humanity in like 2 years if they wanted to. If like the spiders like decided to unionize and like organize, they could wipe out humanity. Hopefully they're not watching this right now. Don't want to give any ideas. But spiders are never going to do that, right? They eat each other. Most of the time they're cannibals. They even eat their own species, so it's never going to happen. But the concept is interesting because I look at us as people and think, how often do we do that? How often do we have this common problem that's affecting everyone, and yet we won't simply unite to address the problems? And I'm not saying don't wrestle with policy, by the way. That's not what I'm saying. Wrestle with policy, speak your conscience, but at the same time, we got to wrestle with this thing together and come together as a group. Yes?
So, based on what you and Jody were saying, it made me actually think of this thing that I may have brought up before, but where it's better, instead of saying, this person is not a Christian, feminist, whatever, their actions are not Christian actions. Their actions are not feminist actions. Like, the way I've seen it is like, if a woman takes her husband's last name, is that feminist? Not necessarily. The action isn't feminist, but the person can still be. That's something that I think is important to look at with all of this. And then another thing it reminded me of this is a tweet that I read the other day where it was talking about I don't want to hear about, it was talking about Elizabeth Warren and Nick Warren, and saying, I don't want to hear about Elizabeth Warren's likability. For just once, we talk about policy.
Yes,
Right.
policy. Word.
So I think that's something we ignore as a populace as a whole, and I'm guilty of it too. If someone annoys me, like, if their policies annoy me, I'll attack them as a person. I'm working on it, but like but I hope that I do it. That's the first step, right? So
Good stuff. I like that. Policy over individuals. Yes. Yeah.
You know, we were talking about practical application, and I think my takeaway from this, and I really try to grab something every week, is that your miracle doesn't have to happen all at once. Like we've talked about before, the only thing that limits Jesus' ability to do miracles is the faith of those around him. Like to really paraphrase, Jesus was like, yeah, I'm never less miraculous than in my hometown amongst my family. They're like, me too, Jesus. But, so maybe your faith doesn't always have to be in fifth gear. You're not going to get your whole miracle at once. But I'll believe today, knowing that maybe if I've got my faith in like a good solid third gear, I can get my miracle in pieces. That's my takeaway.
That's good. Good stuff. Eric's.
It was cool to hear people talk about the, loving your enemies and saying Lord and just, seeing them as children. But I was looking at it, like if this man was coming from that institution, like Judaism, and if he saw a bunch of trees, then he saw people that were good Jewish people. And then I was thinking about the tribal union that Jen was talking about, and like he laid his hands on him once more, and then his sight was restored, and he could see very clearly. it's like not just looking at your enemies, but being able to look at your allies very clearly and see that they themselves can be problematic, and not just because they are within your tribe, within your group, not just because they're Democrats, like that they're, you know, also like, you know, 100.
Yeah.
You know, good. And to me, it was just like allowing this person to see very clearly everything, not just the other.
And that's good. And the one thing I think we should all keep in mind is like transformation, just like in this parable, it's not always instantaneous. I mean, it takes time, right? Like one thing that I enjoy doing that is painful and lovely at the same time, in this weird way, is sharing my background with people. And I do this because I truly believe that the most valuable currency that everyone has in this room, that we all possess and we can carry with us beyond the grave, is the treasure found in our stories. That's the one currency that truly matters. And in my story, I started my journey as I made a career out of being a sexist and bigoted piece of shit. I mean, I was homophobic. I was a horrible person. And I can say that because it was me. I was still a beloved child of God, but still, I was a beloved piece of shit, but I was a piece of shit. I was a terrible human being, y'all. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't regret it. And through encountering people that were much more loving and intelligent than myself, which isn't necessarily always that difficult, I began to see the world differently through many encounters and conversations. Where once my eyes were clouded by hate and fear, I slowly began to see things differently because people didn't give up on me. They didn't give up on me, and they had lots of intimate conversations, difficult conversations and dialogues and debates with me that caused me to slowly remove the blindness from my own eyes. They didn't just walk up to me and put their hands on my head and be like, Christopher, don't be stupid anymore. It took a while. And what I love about this story is that this healing process here is intimate and it's messy. And for me, when my friends called me out on my ignorance, it was like them taking spit and putting it in my eyes. It wasn't pleasant at all. It was messy, but the refusal to surrender me to hatred and fear that taught me to see the world in sheer darkness slowly changed me. It wasn't instantaneous, and I am far from done. I haven't arrived. I don't think I ever will, y'all. But this passage is a gracious reminder that transformation is rarely done in a moment's notice. It's hard, dirty work, and we've got to be willing to get our hands messy and wrestle in the muck. There is hope, and I'm living proof of this, that other people and systems of governance and policies can change if we're willing to do the tough, dirty, nasty wrestling that it's going to take. The work of speaking truth to power and the work of speaking truth to stupid. It's not fun. And speaking of speaking truth, I need to mention this today. Oh, I was thinking about not mentioning it, but then Roscoe was like, you should do it. And I was like, okay. So I got to give a shout out to Rashida this week. And many liberals and moderates and conservative Christians especially were critical of Rashida's language when Rashida said, and you can't be mad because it's a quote, we're going to impeach the motherfucker. Whether Jesus would use that term, motherfucker, is debatable. Jesus advocating for the removal of a tyrant is indisputable. So stop being angry that a woman of color that is oppressed by these policies, a Muslim woman of color is oppressed by these policies, and use the expletive motherfucker to describe somebody that's doing some awful things when you voted for the motherfucker, all right? So would I have used that language? I don't know. I mean, as you all know, I have a problem with profanity. I don't condone it at all. Even Miss Betty is like, bullshit. So what I've done, I'm not sure, but what I am sure is that I'm not a Muslim woman of color living in a nation that is being led by a sexist, racist, Islamophobic white person in power. So let's stop policing the language of the marginalized, please, and let's address the policies that caused them to be marginalized. Amen?
Yes.
On the night that Jesus was betrayed, they took bread and they broke it. And Jesus looked to his friends all around the table, people from different walks of life, and said, "This is my body broken for you." And this was an invitation to take up the movement that Jesus had began. Jesus took this bread and passed it around and said, "Take and eat, and as often as you do so in remembrance of me." And when the bread comes your way, just hold it in your hands. Don't eat it just yet. Because Jesus wasn't done. Jesus poured out some wine and said, "This is my blood. It's going to be poured out for you. Take and drink, and as often as you do so in remembrance of me." If you could, pass the cup around and dip the bread into the cup. And people of all faith or no faith are welcome to take this, partake in these elements. The only thing that's required, I believe, is to take up the initiative of Jesus, which is removing darkness and blindness from this world. And until next week, y'all, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you, and may it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace. See you at lunch in about an hour. Talk to Mike if you want to be there. And if I don't see you at lunch, I'll see you around. Love you guys. I missed y'all. Happy New Year.